Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. In today's show, I'm going to take a look at the upcoming full moon in Capricorn that is arriving June 29th or 30th, depending on whereabouts you are. So in today's show, I'm going to talk about the energy and the themes of the full moon and hopefully give you a few tips about how to work with the full moon and the other astro event that's happening on the same day, which is going to run us into, at the very least, the first half of July. Before we get into everything you need to know about that Capricorn full moon, I wanted to let you know about my next live webinar called More or Less, Navigating Jupiter and the South Node in Leo, which is coming up towards the end of June. In this 90-minute teaching, I'll share how to work with this unusual combination of Jupiter and the South Node in Leo for the next 12 months. This pairing creates a really powerful and somewhat paradoxical energetic field, and it's one that might find you scattering your energy if you're unprepared. However, if you approach this Jupiter and South Node in Leo transit with some intention, you might find that this combination can help open up a remarkable opportunity for realignment. So for all the insights on how to work with Jupiter and the South Node in Leo, pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com, where you can register for this special webinar today. All right, with that message shared, let's dive in to all the ins and outs of this full moon in Capricorn arriving at the end of June. So details and degrees and dates first. So the full moon is at 8 degrees Capricorn, and it is going to be on Monday, the 29th of June, if you're in Canada and the US. It'll be at that full moon peak on the very next day, Tuesday, the 30th, if you're in the UK, Europe, or Australia. And straight away, when I think about a full moon in Capricorn, I'm already aware that there is this symbolic contradiction that is emerging. At the time of the moon is at her emotional and intuitive, fullest, if you like. And this month, the moon is at her emotional and intuitive brightest in a sign that really prefers practicality and real-world experiences rather than immersing itself in feelings. So we're looking at the contradiction between what the full moon typically brings and the way that the sign of Capricorn orients itself or the way it operates. So this is part of what you might be experiencing with the full moon in Capricorn. You might be experiencing some internal tension between a realization that emerges around an emotional situation versus practical requirements or deadlines that need to be managed and met. So it's sort of that tension between the emotional feeling self and the kind of real life requirements or responsibilities or restraints that you might be navigating. This kind of symbolic tension is also what we're exploring and working with when we talk about a planet being in detriment as well. So the moon in Capricorn, technically this is the detriment placement of the moon. And one way to think about this is that the moon is far from her home base. She's as far from her home sign of Cancer as she can be. And think about what it's like for you when you're away from home. Maybe if you've traveled in a foreign country or you've been to places where the customs or the language or the culture or the currency is different from where you normally are. And so for the moon being far from her home base, she is having to make do without familiar comforts, without familiar routines and rhythms, perhaps having to do without the best resources or tools for the task at hand. So she's perhaps unprepared or under-resourced. And that's some of the technical ways that we think about a planet in detriment. Having a lack of resources, being far from home, navigating unfamiliar settings, territory, that type of thing. So with this full moon in Capricorn, there's already this kind of unmoored, maybe unstable edge, and that comes from the moon being full in Capricorn, the sign of her detriment. And so under this full moon in Capricorn, you might have to make do with circumstances that aren't ideal. You might have to make a decision that you don't feel 100% ready for, but it needs to be made. It might mean that you're having to do what you can with what you have rather than wait for the perfect moment, rather than wait for that feeling of being ready or waiting for things to kind of align in that kind of smooth, ideal way. Under this full moon in Capricorn, because it is a cardinal sign, so it does want some action. It wants you to create movement and progress, but you might just be having to create what little or small progress you can, even if things aren't perfect. Sometimes that's a good reminder not to get too hung up on the ideal and just go with what can you do from where you are today. Now, the full moon in Capricorn, this is a sign ruled by Saturn. It's the only earth sign ruled by Saturn. So it is practical. It is responsible. It is grounded. It is so anchored in the kind of tangible, everyday, real realms, which means this full moon in Capricorn might bring a reality check, like it spotlights reality. Oh, in case you weren't aware, this is what's really going on. Clarity, reality, these are all very Saturnian things. The full moon in Capricorn might also help you identify practical constraints that are worth honoring. Sometimes we kind of bump up against limits and we think, I really don't want to be constrained by that, or I really want this to happen sooner, or I'm looking for an outcome that's outside whatever the prescribed path is. But under this particular full moon, it might be worth kind of playing within the limits. There's sort of a erring on the side of caution vibe that I think is worth honoring or worth making part of your way forward at the moment. So a more cautious or restrained quality might help you scale back an ambitious plan, or you might be kind of really motivated by that cautious approach to make a timeline that is on the table more reasonable, which might mean you're going to do less in the timeline that is being discussed. Or it might mean you're thinking it's going to take longer than we expect to get XYZ done. And these are all ways of evoking those kind of contraction, consolidation, restructuring themes that are very much tied to Capricorn, but are also really tied to the planet Saturn. Now, those themes of contraction and simplifying, they are so loud around this full moon because not only is the full moon in Capricorn, a sign ruled by Saturn, but the main aspect that the full moon makes is a square to Saturn itself. So with the full moon at 8 Capricorn, Saturn over at 14 Aries, the moon is full and immediately goes to Saturn. So the planet that bright spotlight, that cosmic spotlight of the moon points to is that Saturn in Aries. And so Saturn in Aries is like double strength around this full moon in Capricorn. So the full moon is in Capricorn, but it is so heavily and strongly influenced by Saturn in Aries. And so with that, what we're really thinking about here is so much emphasis on consolidation and the need to restructure. We need to go back to basics, back to the drawing board. What was the original intention and how did it get so complicated? How can we bring it back to like basic principles, core intentions, simple steps essentially? Under this full moon, it's in Capricorn, it's squaring Saturn. It's so much about, hey, reality check, take it in. These are your duties. Is it possible that you can keep up with these obligations? That aspect from the full moon to Saturn is a square. And that's a clue that adjustments are needed. Whatever you've been working towards, we need to tweak the plan. We either need to adjust the timeline or we need to change the goal. We might need to do a little bit of both. So adjustments about goals and priorities is a huge part of this full moon. With this full moon in Capricorn squaring to Saturn, you might be pushed to make a hard choice about essentials, or you might be in that situation where you're realizing the limitations that you have, maybe around time, could be around energy, could be about money and finance, and that's forcing you to prioritize. Now, that can feel hard, but it's how you get to that place of clarity. Now, the weight of making choices might feel really heavy under this full moon in Capricorn square Saturn. We feel like we've got to do it right, or so much is riding on the choice that we're navigating. Now, the full moon can be really clarifying even as it brings this kind of weighty choice to the surface. The reality is that if you only have a finite amount of time, of energy, or of resources, you really can only do so much. So this full moon is like, you can't have it all at once, for sure. It is like, what do you want to have first? What are you comfortable having second? What can you delay to some unknown future point? Or what do you need to take off the table altogether? So this full moon in Capricorn square Saturn is a clue that whatever you choose, with your back against the wall, in full awareness of all of those constraints, whatever you actually choose and decide to prioritize, that is representative of who and what really matters to you. That is representative of what is necessary for your survival, your safety, and your security right now. Because when we talk about Saturn bringing us back to essentials and necessity, it's like, what do I need if everything else goes away? What do I need left? Is there some basic level of like money or income to have your needs taken care of? Is there a basic sense of social connection? You know, if you don't have enough time to see every friend you would like to, who are those friends that you really want to invest your precious limited time and energy into spending time with? So that's kind of where the heaviness of a full moon in Capricorn square Saturn can lead to this clarity that really shows us who and what truly matters. So one of the ways you can work with this full moon in Capricorn, as much as it doesn't sound very uplifting, it's grounding and it points you towards substance. It points you towards the people and partnerships that are worth showing up for, even when it's hard or more effortful or challenging. And it points you towards those goals, those projects that are going to give you long-term benefit. Because there's nothing short-term about Capricorn, and the essence of Saturn is long-term rather than short-term. I know Saturn in Aries is a little bit confused occasionally because, of course, Aries is a sign that wants immediate results. That's one of the tension points of Saturn in Aries itself. Saturn is like, I want to do a long-term plan here. I want to think about what preserves your security and safety for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And Aries is like, but I want immediate satisfaction. So part of what is so rocky and bumpy for that whole longer 2-year transit of Saturn in Aries is that tension between, do I go for the quick win or do I play the long game? I would encourage you to think about the long game under this full moon in Capricorn, which is so oriented to longer rather than shorter timelines. Okay. So with this full moon in Capricorn, being open to updated insights and information about what needs to be a priority right now, that is one of the best ways you can work with this full moon. There's a lot of cardinal energy. The full moon is in Capricorn. It's ruled by Saturn in Aries. Aries and Capricorn are both cardinal signs. So they do want to get things moving. They want to get going on plans that lead to your ultimate kind of security, safety, and protection. And there may be a part of you that is playing for a quick win here. So that part of you we may not be able to totally turn off, but just be cautious. That part can be in the mix, but we don't necessarily want it running the show. So you are getting lots of updated insights and information about what needs to be a priority now and what tasks or people you may have evolved away from. There's probably going to be some choices where you are realizing what you need to stop, what you need to step away from, what you need to decline or withdraw or pull out from. So Saturn is like, we're not going to keep doing all of these things. As you become aware of what you're ready to release, what you're ready to end, maybe what you've outgrown, what has served its purpose but doesn't need to be carried forward, make that call sooner rather than later. Make that call in your heart, so that truth and that reality check in your own heart first, but communicate that to others as soon as you're kind of aware that's what you're going to do. And that way you can plan an appropriate timeline for the change or the handover. But we are thinking about where, if we think about boundaries, I think about them as fences, like on a farm, the fences between the paddocks. And with this kind of Saturnian energy, the full moon in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn in Aries, I think about there are some holes in the fences and some things are getting through that shouldn't be getting through. Maybe somebody you're in partnership or collaboration with isn't fully upholding their end of the agreement, or they're not fully carrying their weight of responsibilities. And so discussions need to be had about why and how we're going to kind of patch those gaps, if you like. Is it you? Is it somebody else? Do we need to kind of reset the fence altogether? But think about that image of fences, maybe around a property or on a farm, as being boundaries and kind of limits or guardrails. And think about there are some holes in those fences or guardrails that we need to attend to. And that's going to be a great way of working with this full moon in Capricorn square and ruled by Saturn in Aries. Now, because it's very kind of saturated in Saturn, this full moon in Capricorn, there are also themes to do with things like aging and the passing of time that might emerge. That sense of, oh my God, I'm running out of time, or I've only got so much time left. I have seen this kind of almost paralyzed fear of time running out in clients of all ages. So I promise you, it is not specific to your particular ages or circumstances, but it does create a sense of urgency, that feeling of, it almost sometimes starts as a bit of a panic, like I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to run out of energy, I'm not going to be able to get it done. And that feeling, of course, it can bring fear or worry forward, but it can also help you kind of realize, if I'm going to run out of time, if I've only got X amount of time available, I'd better do this thing. And that is your clue, again, about what really matters. So this fear of like maybe aging or time passing, running out of time, it's not like a fear just to paralyze you. It's a fear that can help you clarify what to put first, what to delay, and what you really don't need to be involved with any longer. And so that fear that you might run out of time can actually be a powerful motivator that can sort of push or prompt you towards a difficult choice. So if there's a difficult choice you've been putting off, I hope that if you get any fear under this full moon, I don't really want you all to be afraid, but if it comes up, I hope that it helps motivate you to tackle that problem that you've been avoiding or kind of trying to delay around. Because the other side of Saturn is that it is the planet that represents maturity and wisdom. And so under this full moon in Capricorn at the tail end of June, you might find that events or experiences, a little bit of wisdom perhaps that comes through is helping you really connect with a more wise perspective. So whatever you're dealing with at the end of June, let's try not to be super reactive, get too much of that Saturn in Aries piece in, but let's try to be the most mature, thoughtful, wise version of yourself. That will allow you to make updated choices in the present that helps you learn from past mistakes, that helps you put into action the wisdom that has been so hard won for you thus far. So to kind of summarize this part of today's podcast, the full moon is in Capricorn, it's in detriment, it's ruled by Saturn in Aries, which is in its fall, and that all feels very wobbly. We're not on solid ground. Things are a bit shaky or uncertain. We're dealing with a lot of unknowns. We may not be able to control everything, but there are certain things that it will be appropriate and maybe necessary to move forward on, even in that uncertainty. So this full moon, with the detriment piece and the fall placement of the ruler Saturn, it might actually bring a revelation about something that's not working well. Like, here's a clue where there are, holes in the fences or there are shaky foundations. And that can be helpful because as you learn about what kinds of commitments and obligations are truly sustainable, because you're getting clear on what you can't keep up with, that means that you will have the insight to make a really mature choice moving forward. So sometimes the way different astrology influences work is it shows us where there is a problem or something that needs to be addressed. And in our kind of really seeing and witnessing that, we start to see where we went wrong. Like, how did we get to a place where this thing isn't working well? And that's your clue about what you're going to do differently going forward. Now, there's one other influence that I think has to be mentioned in any conversation about this full moon in Capricorn. And this is another influence that really echoes these themes of adjusting plans and revising commitments. And that is that on the same day of the full moon in Capricorn, Mercury will station retrograde in Cancer. So we have the full moon in Capricorn, which is itself a bit wobbly and a bit unstable, and Mercury starts its next retrograde. That's all happening on the 29th or 30th, depending on where you are. What that means is that for the next 3 weeks until July 23, Mercury is in review and revise mode. Mercury is stationing retrograde in Cancer. It's the sign opposite where the full moon is taking place. So if the full moon brings a dramatic reveal or shows you where a current system and routine needs to be reworked, you might find it really helpful to do some digging, some researching, and reviewing during this Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde in Cancer is especially reflective, and it might pull you back into memories of old dreams and possibilities. There's a lot of reminiscing that is likely to go on with Mercury retrograde in the sign of the moon, which is about memory. So with the full moon in Capricorn and then Mercury starting its retrograde in Cancer on the same day, there's a lot here about looking back or revisiting the past. Capricorn is a sign about, like literally, how did we get here? Where did this journey start? So you have to go back in time to figure out how you ended up where you are. And so this idea of looking back or revisiting the past, it might be temporary, like we temporarily need to go back and, mend the fences or plug the gaps or revise the decisions, like revisiting things we chose recently. It may be that something needs to be fixed. Something didn't go as planned in the last, few weeks or couple of months, and we need to go back and get that working before we can go forward from here. So it really feels that before you can power ahead now, you might need to go back and deal with unfinished business that is keeping you stuck or keeping you kind of tethered to old ways, old feelings, and old fears. So shoring up your foundations can help ensure that everything that you build from here forward is built on solid rather than shaky ground. And so this full moon in Capricorn, with all the insight and illumination it brings, because it kind of partners with that Mercury retrograde in Cancer, it's influenced by Saturn in Aries, which itself is going to go retrograde before the end of July. It really feels like we're going back before we go forward. So if I was to summarize the podcast in one sentence, what is the unfinished business that you need to resolve now before you can put new plans and projects into place? I would also really encourage you to go as slow as you need to make sure that you're putting down really deep and solid roots at the moment. So let me know. I would love to hear what is coming to light for you under this full moon in Capricorn, square to Saturn in Aries. Is there a hard but necessary choice you're navigating? Is there something you have to go back to the past and deal with? Let me know how these themes are coming up for you. And if you would like some tips on working with Jupiter and the South Node in Leo over the next 12 months, I hope to see you in my webinar very soon. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Till next time, take care.